Heart of a Champion, Chapter 4. The next day, I was at Henry Ford at noon sharp, and so was Jimmy. I was looking forward to a long afternoon playing baseball, but that was Super Bowl Sunday, and Mr. Winter had a $100 bet on the game. We'd hardly started when he called it quits. "Can Seth at least come over?" Jimmy asked. "Fine by me," his father answered. "I have to check with my mom," I said. "You can call her from our house," Jimmy said. "Tell her I'll give you a ride home," Mr. Winter added. Jimmy lived on Massachusetts Avenue, in a house exactly like mine. That may sound weird, but there must be 1,000 homes in Redwood City, exactly like mine. After I called my mother, Jimmy pulled 2 peanut butter sandwiches out of the refrigerator. My mom made these this morning. She goes out whenever my dad watches football. She says he gets too loud. Mr. Winter came in for beer. "You boys going to watch the game with me?" Jimmy shook his head. "I'm going to show Seth my baseball stuff." He looked at me. "Unless you want to watch the game." "No," I said, "I'd rather look at your stuff." Jimmy had the same room in his house that I had in mine. First door down the hall on the right. But nothing else was the same. My room was boring. I didn't know it until I saw Jimmy's, but it was. My walls were white, my bedspread was white, my curtains were white. I had a stupid picture of Mount Shasta above my head. Jimmy had pennants of baseball teams on the ceilings. His bedspread had the logo of the San Francisco Giants on it. The design on the carpet was a baseball diamond. The walls were covered with posters of ball players. I stared, my mouth open. Who are these guys? If he had been anybody else, I probably wouldn't have asked. But you can tell if a guy is going to make you feel dumb, even if you don't know him much. Jimmy wasn't that kind of guy. Jimmy pointed them out one at a time. "That's Willie Mays. He did it all. He hit home runs, hit for average, stole bases, and played a great center field. Next to Mays is Juan Marichal. He had a high leg kick and a mean screwball. Opposite Marichal is Willie McCovey. In the seventh game of the 1962 World Series, Jimmy circled his room, telling me stories about each of the players. From his desk, I picked up a photograph of an old-time ball player. I thought the guy looked stupid with his tiny glove and his baggy uniform. I laughed. "Who's this?" I'll never forget the look on Jimmy's face as he grabbed the picture out of my hand. "That's Honus Wagner. He was the greatest shortstop ever. He had a .329 lifetime batting average. He signed a contract in 1908 for $10,000 a year and played 21 years without asking for a raise." Jimmy paused. "I'm going to be like Honus Wagner." He plopped onto the floor and pulled out a huge stack of tattered, dirty baseball cards from the nightstand. I sat down next to him. "Who do you think was better, Stan Musial or Ted Williams?" he asked. "I don't know," I answered, which was true enough, since I'd barely heard of either one of them. Jimmy held out Musial's card to me. "A lot of people think Williams was, but I don't. Musial hustled more singles into doubles, more doubles into triples, and look what he hit in 1957. Jimmy pointed to a number on the back of the card. "He was 36 years old, but he should have won the MVP award that year." Jimmy talked baseball the whole afternoon. Earned runs, averages, slugging percentages, walks to strikeout ratios. It was all new to me, but I wasn't bored. They say that baseball is like a fever, and that once you catch it, you never recover. That day I caught it. When I looked at the clock, it was 5:15. "I told my mother I'd be home by 5. I've got to go," I said. Jimmy picked out a dozen of the baseball cards he'd spread over the floor. "You can have these if you want." "Thanks," I said. And as I took those cards out of his hand, I could feel how hard it was for Jimmy to give them away. In the living room, Mr. Winter was stretched out on the sofa, a beer in his hand and a slew of empties on the floor. "Dad, Seth's got to go home now." Mr. Winter groaned. "Can't he wait until the game's over?" I looked at Jimmy. I was already late. "Dad," Jimmy insisted, "you said you'd take him home." Driving to my house, Mr. Winter kept spinning the radio dial, trying to get the game. He was speeding, too, and hardly slowed down at stop signs. "You can let me off here," I said once he reached my block. I was barely out of the door before he sped off. I didn't even have time to thank him. The whole week I went back and forth between being eager to see Jimmy again and being afraid to see his father. But when Saturday rolled around and Mr. Winter saw me, he smiled. "You look a little sleepy, Seth." A game of pepper will wake you up.